Friends, thank you very much for listening to the Frederick Henry Show. This is Frederick Henry, and I just wanted to ask the question, what do people do when the foundations are being undermined? In fact, when the foundations are being destroyed. And there's a few observations that I'd like to make about that. First of all, you can always join in. I mean, there are people in our society who have joined in with the destructors, the destroyers. Black Lives Matters, Antifa are the destroyers, and their cohorts and their friends. And their aim is to destroy the structure. They want to tear down the monuments, which are representative of our culture. They want to destroy our government, which is represented by the police. They want to deface our institutions, which is represented by the attacks on our federal buildings and the like, more City Hall and the like. And people in the cities, it seems to me, and very interesting because I happen to be a Christian, I think of Sodom and Gomorrah. People in the cities have decided, by and large, to be silent, to go along, to be complicit, and to many of their leaders. I understand where they're coming from, because people in the cities are looking to their academic leaders, their college leaders, their political leaders, and they're seeing them take a knee, they're seeing them join the mob, they're seeing them refuse to defend the statues and the cultural symbols, they're seeing them abandon City Hall, and the people are disheartened, and therefore they say to themselves, what's the use? Let it burn, let it go, and in many cases, even join in. It's better to be on the right side of the wrong side than to be on the right side of the right side and die. And so people are afraid. People are putting Black Lives Matters and Antifa signs on their properties, hopefully that the mobs will not destroy their properties while the mobs go along and destroy everything else. I'm reminded of Niemöller in the Second World War in Germany, who said, the Nazis came for the mentally incompetent, and I said nothing. The Nazis came for the homosexuals and the lesbians and the LGBT, all those people, and I said nothing. The Nazis came for the Catholics, the Nazis came for the Jews, the Nazis came for the Gypsies, and then eventually the Nazis came for me. And by the time they came for me, there was no one left to object. And he reflects on that because he did survive the war, and he says, we should have spoken up, we should have been resistant, we should have not gone along with it, because the Nazis were evil. And I'm suggesting to you that Antifa, Black Lives Matters, are not good. They're evil. They're anti-black. I look at the crowds of Antifa and of Black Lives Matters. They're white. They're white women. They're white college students, girls. They're white college students, boys. They're roustabouts who have no jobs. They're people who have no loyalty to their families or their communities. They're people who are without allegiance to the country or to the community or to anything, to the church. They have no loyalty but to themselves, to anarchy. And I don't have any sympathy for these people. These are anarchists, and anarchist means no rules, no government, no the survival of the fittest. It's the descent. Anarchy is the descent of the society into the jungle, into the survival of the fittest, into the survival of the strongest. And, if you want to join that, that's okay. You do that. I don't think you should. But the rest of us should resist. We should speak up. We should resist. We should do what we have to do. I'm reminded of Kitty Genovese way back in my childhood, a young woman who was being assaulted in a back alley. She cried, she screamed, she called for help. Nobody in a gigantic apartment complex with their windows open in the summer responded. They didn't even call the police. She was raped. And the guy left her after he raped her, and she called out and she moaned and she asked for help. Nobody in the apartment complex, hundreds of people in the apartment complex with the window open, responded and did not call the police. The perpetrator came back and he beat her. She called out and she screamed and she asked for help. Nobody helped Kitty Genovese. Kitty Genovese was left to her own devices because everybody else was a coward. Then he left her there, beaten, raped, bruised, in the middle of the night, and eventually he came back to her and he killed her. and no one had responded. No one had even called the police. No one had even tried to help. Nobody had even gone down, even after the perpetrator was gone, to give her help and assistance. And that always stood out in the 60s and 70s, I think the 70s it was, as a black mark on civil society, that civilized people put their heads in the sand, closed their windows, closed their doors, hid in their closets, refused to help because they were afraid for themselves. And this poor girl, she was raped, she could have survived. She was beaten, she could have survived. But finally, she was murdered because nobody did anything to help her. That's not just ancient history. Today I watched YouTube. I wasn't there, but I watched the YouTube video, which was reposted on Twitter, of a man pulled out of his car by 3 assailants. They beat him. He ran away. They beat him again. They knocked him around. He fought. They came back. 2 of them ran away. Then they came back. But I noted that there were at least 5 or 6 people in the environment and many cars passing by on a local street. They just passed by. One of the people in the crowd took a photograph of the whole thing, a video of the whole thing, and the other 5 or 6 just watched as this man was brutally kicked, beaten, knocked down, kicked in the head, kicked in the by a mob. You know, sometimes we have to take a chance. Sometimes we have to take a risk. Sometimes one person is a majority. I think if one person had gone and tried to help, that would have been a biggie. And that reminds me of a second video I saw yesterday of a man who entered a store owned by people from Asian descent, and he began to rob the store. And the woman gathered her 3 employees together, pushed him out the front door. She went out the front door, and she locked the front door with the man who was perpetrating the crime inside the store. She didn't resist him. She didn't pull a gun. She ran out the front door with the 3 workers. The man was locked in the door, and he ended up on his knees, begging them, pleading with them, asking them, please let me out, please let me out. I don't want to go to jail. Now that is an indication that we can do things. We can be smart. You know, as a child, I used to watch all these videos, and people pull a gun, and you put your hands up in the air. Right next to the person is a lamp. Next to the person is a book. Beside the person is some other object. Instead of putting your hands up in the air and saying, oh, please don't shoot, maybe we need to throw the lamp at the perpetrator, throw the book at the perpetrator, throw whatever objects we have, kick him in the shins, kick him in the balls, whatever it takes, and stop being victims. We're being victimized, and we're willingly going to victimhood because we're afraid. I'm reminded also of Jewish scholars, which I read after the Holocaust, and they said that the Jews went to the trains, they went to the extermination chambers, they went to Auschwitz and Dachau and Belsen-Bergen because they believed that they had no chance, no possibility. And I'm watching these videos, 6 or 7 guards, 9, 10 people guarding them with rifles as hundreds and thousands of people enter the trains, hundreds and thousands of people willingly, like cattle, like sheep, without any possibility of resistance, going to their deaths and knowing that they're going to their deaths. I'm watching 5, 6, 700, 800 people being herded into cattle cars by 6 or 7 or 9 Gestapo officers. Resist, fight, charge them, kick them, knock them down, stomp on their faces, run away, do something. Don't just go to your death willingly. And I'm wondering, in our society today with the masks, with the COVID, all this kind of thing, are we so willing to just put up our hands and say, please don't shoot? Are we so willing to just put on the mask and say, please put us into the cattle car? Are we so willing to give up our freedom and our dignity and our independence because some bullies tell us that there's a COVID or there's a danger or that the enemy is the other guy? You know, we have, if we are exterminated, if we in America commit social and political and religious and financial suicide, It's because we willingly went to the concentration camps with our hands in the air, begging for mercy, instead of using our numbers to resist and resist and resist. We can do it. We don't have to be victims. We can be actors and proactive and stop those who would bully us, burn our towns, burn our cities, and destroy our statues and destroy our culture. I recently read just this morning about a professor at the University of Massachusetts nursing program who wrote an article sympathetic to Black Lives Matters, but said in the article, all lives matter. And she was called in, and I'm going to put this out there, by her female superiors and by her female supervisors and by her female people, administrators, and she was told, that is not allowed. You are fired. You are fired. For no reason other than she said all lives matters. Now, in the Gestapo era, in the Nazi era, in the time of Hitler and Stalin and fascism, you had to wear a yellow star. If you didn't wear the yellow star, you were beaten, you were kicked, you were knocked out, you were killed by your neighbors, by the people in the community, not only by the Gestapo, not only by the SS, but by your neighbors, by the people in the community, because they were afraid that you were breaking the rules. Today, I went out for a walk. I was walking in a street. There was nobody. A woman walked on the other side. It happened to be a woman. It could have been a man, but it happened to be a woman. She was walking on the other side of the street, easily 20 feet away. She stopped and pointed at me and she says, "You are, you're wrong. You're a terrible person. You're wrong. Don't you know you have to have a mask? You're stupid. You're creating death. You're destroying everything." I said to the woman from across the street, 20 feet away, "Ma'am, I'm in the open air. It's a sunny day. It's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. What is your problem? You are required to wear a mask. The governor has given an edict. You must wear a mask." Now listen, folks, I don't mind wearing a mask if it's necessary to prevent other people from getting ill in a store or in close quarters or whatever it is. I have no anxiety. But here I am walking in the street, 20 feet away from my nearest neighbor, only 2 people in an entire city block, and this woman is screaming at me and yelling at me and calling me all kinds of nasty names because I'm not obeying. Is the mask the same thing as the Star of David under the Nazis? Is the mask the same thing as disobeying Stalin? Is the mask the same thing as disobeying Hitler? What are we talking about? We have to take stock of what we're doing and what we're giving up and what we're willing to allow people to oppress us and suppress us and by fear and fright, and not willing to take a stand and not willing to preserve our own freedoms. We have been given freedom from our ancestors. Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Lincoln, Roosevelt, all these other people fought for our freedoms. Imperfect people nonetheless. But in the terms of our freedom, in terms of our rights, in terms of our Americanism, they were right, not wrong. And if we abandon them, if we abandon their principles, if we abandon everything they stood for, and we give up, we put up our hands in the air and say, "Please put me on the train to Dachau, put me on the train to Auschwitz, put me on the train to Belsenbergen so that I can burn in the fires of the pit because I'm unwilling to resist," then maybe we deserve what we get. It's a terrible thing, but that's the way it seems to be. And people tell me, "Oh, Black Lives Matter is about black people." Listen, I haven't owned a slave. My father didn't own a slave. My grandfather didn't own a slave. My great-grandfather didn't own a slave. That's as far back as we go in the States. Otherwise, they come from Europe. We are not guilty. We are not guilty of systematic racism. I grew up in New York City in the project area, in the public project area. Plenty of blacks, plenty of Jews, plenty of Italians, plenty of Germans, plenty of ethnicities. Even I don't think there were gypsies, but there were all kinds of people. And we all got along because we all wanted to live in peace. We all wanted to live in freedom. We all wanted to shop together in the same stores. We all wanted to ride the same subways. We all wanted to go on the same buses to work. We all wanted to attend the same schools. We were getting along and we got along.